Hello, good evening. It's Jay Foss back with another content video. Today I'm going over a top 10 list of heroes or sets of heroes that ruined, I say ruined playfully, but I mean damaged the game. It does not necessarily have to be related to them being overpowered or how they performed in battle, but can also include things like how the development team reacted to them, how the community reacted to them, what their impact was long-term on the health of the game, etc. I did go into a few line groups and sort of got a feel for what people thought on this. Most of the list is reflected in that. I did find that a lot of it was just a handful of things that people were very passionate about. So some of these are my opinion and observation as well, but for the higher ones in the list, it mostly is community feedback. So starting out at number 10, I have Mysterio. Now, Mysterio is not a very good hero, but ultimately, I think Mysterio's negative impact on the game has to do with his pull chance. So when he came out, and he still is, a 0.1% pull. So 1 in 1,000 pulls, you'd expect to get a Mysterio. Now, there previously had never been odds this low. And I think what it did was set the table, along with other things I'll mention with some of these other picks, for Small Giant / Senga / Take-Two Interactive to put summoning odds incredibly low without much repercussions. And I think that's the big negative impact here is you have a hero that's literally 1 in 1,000 pulls to get. Now, he's not very good, but now you see the super or the elemental quest heroes, some of them are quite good, locked behind this nearly impossible paywall where you'd have to expect to pay about $3,000 US to get them on average. So I think that's where Mysterio, his release and impact hurt, and that's why I have him at number 10. This was a hot topic and gave me the idea for it, given that I was chasing him, and is Mr. Pingy. Now, Mr. Pingy is good on offense, probably average to below average on defense. Where he really shines and is becoming a bit of controversy is the Mythic Titan, to where basically every single thing in the past for the Mythic Titan is out, and it's all Mr. Pingy. The Mythic Titan's not an incredibly popular event, but given that this is a hot topic right now, and also it affected me and members of my alliance personally, Mr. Pingy, I say this playfully, Mr. Pingy ruining the Mythic Titan here at number 9, and it was also mentioned a couple times in line groups that they feel the peer pressure deal of the Mythic Titan is quite dirty, but that's just a sidebar. Pingy, number 9 for heroes that ruined the game. For number 8, I have, and this is a guy that represents a category rather than an individual hero, is basically the category of slow heroes that can wipe your team. Now, I don't necessarily agree with this one, but I play in a very high alliance. When you get down to the lower alliance, or even the mid-level and higher mid-level alliances, when you encounter heroes like Khufu or Gossick, yes, they are slow, and to me, that's what makes them balanced. But for the players that don't have a lot of taunt, a lot of boosted health, a lot of things like that, these heroes are incredibly frustrating. And I'm honestly surprised you don't see heroes like this more at tank. Again, this isn't one I personally agree with, but it was brought up several times. I can definitely see how frustrating it is, because when I see these guys like Khufu and Gossick in regular play, my first instinct is I'll just bring a taunt hero and, aerial costume, boosted health, and, Krampus for taunt, something to mitigate it. And if you don't have stuff to mitigate it, and there's a lot of the player base that doesn't. And if you bring 4s against these guys, they're going to die easier generally. So this is a frustrating point for a large section of the player base. So I have heroes that can wipe a team, and I know that's overused a lot, but heroes like Gossick and Khufu literally can wipe a team by themselves. It isn't like 2 Panthers firing or 2 fast heroes. These heroes can single-handedly kill a team, and that's a point of frustration for a large portion of the player base. So Gossick, number 8. And number 7, like the last one, I have another collection of heroes, and I have the ninjas. Now, I think the negative impact of the ninjas was one of the first times, if not the first time, we saw a portal with non-featured. So if you were chasing a specific hero or two, the odds in general were lower. It sort of extended off the Mysterio stuff that I discussed, to where I don't think you realize that, like, if you wanted Ruby now, Ruby is the other red ninja 5-star, the odds are worse than Mysterio. Like, it's less than 1 in 1,000. It's sort of built on the terrible odds. The other thing that I think this category represents is that, and I'll talk about this with higher placements in this countdown, is that for reasons that I'll mention later, the developers did not want to make overpowered defensive heroes because it led to frustration, but they still needed people to summon. So at the time, when they came out, with the exception of Jade, and Jade's decent now actually with the buff, but they decided to make people chase rather than make overpowered defensive heroes. We're going to make very, very, very strong, for at the time, offensive heroes. Now, that in theory is great, until those heroes become so powerful that they become defensive heroes. Now, the ninja charge mechanic will always limit them on high-end defenses, because you can't control when they fire. But the other thing that I think hurts them, or had a negative impact, I don't think is realized a lot, is that direct mana reduction has been a part of the meta for a pretty long time. I mean, going back to Gwen, direct mana reduction was there. Costume of Lacey. I think Water Pipe will overtake Eminem, or Miriam and Midnight rather, once it gets more proliferated. And you have this subset of charge heroes that are just so good at counting one of the best things. They have very low specific odds. If you're at a huge advantage fighting direct mana reduction if you don't have a charge mechanic. So for those reasons, I have just the terrible odds, building off the Mysterio concept. The fact that, hey, they're not great on defense, so we make them as strong as we want. Offense, if something's overpowered on offense, it doesn't matter. But those heroes bleed into defense eventually. And I think with a charge mechanic, that's okay. But once they started doing similar to non-charge heroes, we really got a problem. And you'll see that addressed in one of the other later numbers. But for now, for this, I have ninjas at number 6. At number 6, I have another category of heroes, and it's 3 and 4 stars that are relevant defensively. These are an example. You can name more. Ferrant, before he was nerfed, was a 4-star that was being utilized by as high as top 2. Korea ran Ferrant tanks a few times. Team Korea did. They had a 4-star, so 4 stars are fairly easy to acquire relative to 5 stars. And you had a 4-star that could be a top-tier tank, essentially. And he was nerfed. Azima, who was similar to Ferrant in some ways, but Azima was nerfed around the same time El Nadaha was buffed. Like, think how wild that is. Treeville is very popular, even in 5, like, all the way to 7 Days Departed level rush defense for those who didn't have Alfric. And this, I think, was just, I don't think it's realized how impactful this is. This basically represents the developer saying, we are not going to let you have an elite 3 or 4 star tank. If it is, we're going to get rid of it. I'm very surprised Kalo hasn't been adjusted again because of how useful he is in rush defense. But these three were adjusted and represents the class of, hey, you're going to have to pay for your tank. You're going to have to spend money and you're going to have to acquire a tank. We're not going to let you get off cheap with these formerly good tanks. If there is a 4-star tank that makes it into the 5-star meta, we are going to nerf him. And I think that's why these heroes and heroes like them, they're impactful in that way and how the developers handled them. So that's why I have this class of heroes at number 6. I got Gravemaker at number 5. Gravemaker, for a few reasons, he's part of the Telluria Vela meta, but probably the least important part of it. He was one of, if not the first, very fast speed hero, and speeding up the game. The trend is speeding up the game to where in beta today, a hero that can put up taunt and 4 tile, undispellable taunt and 4 tiles is currently in beta testing. So he sort of started that trend of speeding up the game. It also sort of encapsulated a period of great stagnation early in the game, to where for I think it was 19 or 20 consecutive months, Gravemaker was the most popular hero in top 100 raid defenses for over a year and a half straight. I think that also influenced into, and a lot of these are connected, but it definitely influenced into making hero, although not the biggest factor, influenced Hero of the Months getting relatively weaker over time, speeding up the game to the high-end regular war now is basically like playing Rush War in some ways. But for those reasons, I have Gravemaker at number 5. At number 4, I have Alfric. I do think Alfric is balanced well in normal play. I actually enjoy, to an extent, fighting against her in Rush, although it can be frustrating. But her impact in Rush, in terms of negatively affecting good portions, sizable portions of the community, cannot be denied. I've seen everything from, I've seen 2 players in top 100 alliances get less than a 10, or I wasn't part of those wars, but 2 players in top 100 alliances we got 8s and rage quit the game. I've seen players in top 5 alliances many times get less than 100 points in high-end Rush War. It's one of those rage-inducing things when it can go wrong, and now there are more counters now. But also, sort of going back to the Gravemaker and other situations, it's stagnated the game mode dramatically to where you basically now have Kalo on the left wing, Mother North on the right wing, Alfric and tank, and now, especially with Soul Exchange, Ludwig on left flank. And it's just the same every single time. I've been the same for a while. And they had Quintus costume in beta. It was adjusted downward in beta. He's not going to be better than Alfric, in my opinion. But it shows sort of a lack of creativity on the developers to come up with something to replace. And not that they should. I mean, I don't like them forcing meta changes. But the reality is it has created a lot of rage, and a lot of people hate Rush. A lot of frustration with Alfric, and a lot of stagnation. I will also throw out there that Kalo was mentioned as a factor in Rush as well. But the main perpetrator here, I think, is Alfric, and that's why she comes in at number 4. For number 3, I have a category of heroes, and we will call it fast overpowered heroes. This is probably the second most mentioned thing I got when I brought this question up. People feel, and I agree, that it's accelerated, and you have heroes that can basically do now what slow heroes fairly recently were doing, particularly in yellow with Anne Jove, and Ojima, I guess, coming out, you basically have a problem, and it sort of tied into what I was saying with the ninjas, to where everything is so fast that people don't feel they have a fair shot if the board is slow. So, before, and to an extent now you can obviously too, but there's a growing sentiment that the defenses are so fast with the family bonuses, which I didn't even mention with the ninjas, but that really was the first turning point for the family bonuses as well. You have these family bonuses from the Halloween heroes speeding stuff up. And I've done raids where I've won with just 2 of these. So there's a growing sentiment that regular play is too fast. And it's frustrating. We're number 3 in War, number 2 in the Mythic, and we're number 4 in AQ of the most recent cycle. This was cited recently, like yesterday, for retirements in our group. We had 5 players retire or take a break after a war we won. So it's a very frustrating element from the offensive perspective. Now, I'm not of the mindset that, hey, we should win every single raid and all that, and raids should be easy and war should be easy. I'm not necessarily of that mindset, but when you have a baseline or a level and you're used to playing at sort of a comfort level for a long time, it gets dramatically harder in a very, very short period of time. That can definitely factor into player frustration. And this, that I'm calling the fast overpowered category, has been a main source of frustration. Let's see if I can show this well. I mean, we can show the opponent. They have most of their stuff up. Like, it's just almost carbon copies of Anne, Jove, Costume Guardian Pan. It's just the same heroes that are not necessarily difficult to counter for 1 or 2 hits, but once you get into facing them for all 6 hits, it's a pain in the ass. And I basically think they have accelerated too fast, and now it's almost spiraling out of control to where you have, like I mentioned, I've won raids with just 2 Costume Guardian Panthers. Just 2 heroes. And I think that's when it gets out of hand. Compare these to any slow hero too, except for maybe like 5. And then there's just no reason, there's no logical way that you can say this skill deserves to be fast speed. And I have 2, I might do a 3rd, but it's getting ridiculous with what fast and very fast heroes can do. Players get frustrated. You basically have 4 to 6 moves to get your tiles. If you can't, it's over. Game over no matter what. So, fast OP is number 3. At number 2, for heroes or sets of heroes that ruin the game, I have non-Season 1 costumes. When Season 1 costumes were announced, it was largely felt, and it even explicitly said, it was a way to bring Season 1 heroes up to competitive levels again. You could argue it was inevitable that there would be non-Season 1 costumes, but then it just gets in the same situation where Season 1 gets left behind again, and then there's superior talents, and it's this endless cycle of adding things to create a revenue base, although super talents didn't. And I think that's the big issue here with costumes, is that there is nothing that prevents them, if they feel that a certain hero is not performing well, from buffing it, from making it more powerful, even increasing its stats or its mana speed. Nothing prevents that. But instead, and I agree generally with the sentiment, the costume is basically, in a roundabout way, selling balance updates rather than actually doing balance updates to keep the game relatively competitive and fair in terms of when heroes are released. They obviously want heroes that are older to become irrelevant so they can create revenue off new heroes. But I think this was a really bad precedent. I remember being in beta when one of those first sets came out. I think it had like Finn, Lepus, Titan, Killer, and Lepus, and they were ridiculous at that time. And there was a huge pushback because it was just like, well, these are already strong heroes, buff the heroes. And I definitely agree with that sentiment. Like, you know, Guardian Panther's costume's ridiculous, but what about Boss Wolf, Mach R, and Salmon Loki? Like, they're obviously terrible. Why can't we buff them to keep the game balanced? And they may, but it's incredibly unlikely. It's more likely they'll just create an overpowered costume and then basically sell you or make you pay for the balance update. So I think this is one of the most destructive things that's actually occurred in the game. I still think they should be available in the training camps. I still think there should be a row and soul exchange where you can get just a costume, not base hero, but just a costume for 5 souls. So you can sort of add these guys cheaply. I advocated for a costume quest monthly to where, you know, you could add, because I really feel this is so dirty and it's basically saying we're not going to make the game fair. We don't give a shit about balance. We're going to make you pay for the balance update. And that's why I have non-season 1 costumes at number 2. And for number 1, for heroes that ruined empires and puzzles, I have Telluria. I also have Vela on here because she's a part of it. I have a whole bullet list to go through here, so bear with me. Starting out with not listening to beta testers and revamping the beta program altogether. Obviously, not listening to beta testers has been a thing for a while in terms of them saying heroes are too strong and them getting pressed out anyway in the interest of company revenue. But it also, in my opinion, affected how they select beta players to an extent, because there were beta players that said she was underpowered in testing, and I think there were only like 8 to 10 people who actually even gave feedback. So it sort of reshaped beta, but also exemplified the problem of them not listening to beta players. The impact of Telluria, who was very hard at the time of release and then got 2 nerfs, Vela was also nerfed a couple times, was that the player base plummeted. And there's really no denying how impactful it is, or was. Within 3 months, the player base had decreased by 33% since after the release of Telluria. And after 6 months after she was released, the player base had dropped by half. Currently, the player base, and this is being very generous, is 1 million players. I say generous because at the end of the year is when they wipe the bot accounts. If you don't know, it's actually in your terms of service. There are bot accounts created by the developers, and they usually get cleared at the end of the year. So if it's showing 1 million, it may actually be 800,000 or so, but it was 3.4-ish million when I started in April of 2019 for reference. So with her difficulty and the anger over the nerfs, it plummeted the total number of players. She was relatively easy to obtain as Hero of the Month with 1.3% summoning odds. This created a situation to where pretty much everybody who spent money that wanted her got her. This in turn had a effect on Hero of the Months. For Telluria, a lot of the Hero of the Months were really good for their time, including Sashat, Kingston, Gravemaker, Vela before the nerf, Telluria, Zelene. I mean, just Lacey when she came out. I mean, they were sort of some of the better heroes, and sort of started this trend to where the developers were so afraid of making a overpowered Hero of the Month that they just didn't do it. And the Hero of the Months really weren't that good afterward because they didn't want a situation to where, you know, everyone in the top 100 had this one hero. So it really damaged the value of the Hero of the Month. And then you still see that reflected today, where generally the Hero of the Months just aren't that good. I mean, look at how crappy the Hero of the Month is for this month. So they're basically soul exchange food, 75% of the time. Yeah, it's frustrating that this happened, but that's a huge shift, basically weakening the Hero of the Month. It created stagnation. To where basically everywhere in the top 100 almost Telluria was required. I was fighting an alliance that hovered between, I think, 800 and 1200 at the time. So we'll call that mid-level. And there were still wars. We'd see 20 Telluria. Yeah, she was just everywhere. I mean, everybody wanted her, almost got her, almost. That was spending at least, and it created this just stale meta where you were facing a really hard tank, and usually the rest of the defense was similar too, over and over and over again in every single aspect of the entire game. A point brought up to me as well was that this really was the first significant nerfs. Previously, now I'm not counting like the very beginning of the game, like within months after release, where they were still figuring out basically what the game was. But you had some nerfs before this to Athena, Ares, Guinevere, Zelene, but nothing to the point to where it basically took a hero that was by far the number one tank and best tank ever that existed in the game, and then made them almost worthless in terms of everything. So it basically, you know, people chased and people got the hero, and the hero performed very well on defense. And on the first release was actually serviceable on offense too. And they just said, nope, we're going to make her worthless. This trend you saw continued, and it really set the stage for the continued absolute neutering of premier tanks. We just saw Nullfod basically get destroyed. They could have kept Nullfod relevant by changing him to boosted health, or there's other ways they could have kept him good, but instead they just decided, hey, he's top tank. We don't even want to ever see him in the top tier again. We're going to make him, downgrade him so much instantly that he just isn't a viable option at top tier, and he's not for top tier tank anymore. People are going back to Bara that didn't have other options. So first significant nerfs, and like I mentioned, it's just forced a meta shift. This is the first time the developers said, well, going in, they first said, we want to make a premier green tank, and they've admitted this explicitly on the forums that we wanted a really good green tank. There were other options that were going to be coming available, like Heimdall, and I think one or two others that would be passable. So you had the situation where the developers basically say, hey, we want a green tank meta. We want people to summon for those green tanks. That is bad, but it's not as bad as the opposite, where they basically say, we don't want this tank to be the premier tank anymore, rather than come up with something else or whatever. We're just going to kill it. And you saw it with Nullfod, you saw it with Telluria, you might see it with Mary Midnight, who knows. But the fact that the developers basically explicitly forced a meta shift, both on the front end and the back end of Telluria's release, and it sort of became a trend and an excuse to neuter particularly tanks, but also other heroes in the future, is almost sickening. And I will mention that they had other options. At this time, I believe one or none of the 4-star Red Season 1 initial costumes were out. They could have very easily given Scarlet's costume a Dispel, Khalil's costume a Cleanse or a status block. Shale, I think, was after this, just after this Telluria era, but you could have made Shale not be one of the worst 5 stars or one of the worst 4 stars in the game. There were other options, especially at the 4-star level at that time, to create something that was a reasonable counter to it, but instead they just decided to destroy her. This has sort of been a point in several of these. It sort of shaped the odds. It became no longer a top-tier hero, particularly a top-tier defensive hero, would be at not only 1.3% availability in a summon, but just kept sort of going whittled down, and that's why I wanted to include Mysterio on this list. So where the point, now if you want a top-tier hero, it's going to be 0.3% or lower, instead of this 1.3 that you used to be able to grab with Hero of the Month. And you see even dirty tricks within that realm, like taking away featured heroes, putting up tempting portals like Black Friday and Challenge Fest that have okay odds for 5-star in general, but make it very hard to get something specific. You see the complete dilution of the ninja pool, to where if you're chasing a particular ninja, you basically have to cash in your retirement. So all these, and I think this was the obvious choice if you've been playing the game for a while, was Telluria for heroes that destroyed the game. She was strong. It wasn't handled well. She was nerfed. People were mad that she was strong. People were mad that she was nerfed. She was mishandled by the developers in almost every turn. And it represents almost every bad precedent that is currently in the game now, except for Limit Breakers, which I was against Limit Breakers, but she has nothing to do with Limit Breakers. But so that's my list of 10 heroes that destroyed the game. I'd like to thank the people that helped me in the various line groups that I put the message out for. And thank you for watching.